It doesn't matter whether it's a dumbbell, a kettlebell, or a resistance machine. Your muscles contract or relax.
Your body's different every day, so it's not about comparison to yourself from last week. It's what did I do today?
In any strength training workout, the best you can give is all that you've got.
Welcome to the Strength Changes Everything podcast, where we introduce you to the information, latest research, and tools that will enable you to live a strong, healthy life. On this podcast, we will also answer your questions about strength, health, and well-being. I'm Amy Hudson. I own and operate 3 exercise coach studios. My co-hosts are Brian Sagan, co-founder and CEO of The Exercise Coach, and Dr. James Fisher, leading researcher in evidence-based strength training. And now for today's episode.
Hi, everyone. It is Amy and Dr. Fisher with you today. So if you are a listener of this podcast, one thing we know about you is that you care about fitness, you care about wellness, you care about strength, and you're pretty smart. If you've listened to all of our episodes before and taken notes, you are just full of knowledge in the area of fitness, strength, health, and wellness. But we've got a little game for you that is combined with a recent research paper. And the game, you may have heard the game, Are You Smarter Than a Fifth Grader? That was a show from years back. And if you know that show, today's game is similar. So today's game is called, Are You Smarter Than the Average Gym Goer? Okay, so you are going to take a little quiz with us live on the air today. And your score is going to tell us if you are smarter than the average gym goer. Dr. Fisher is a fun-loving guy, and he's pulled a really fun research paper that we're making into a game today. And so, Dr. Fisher, can you introduce kind of where this game is coming from and the research paper that you are pulling it from?
Yeah, absolutely, Amy. Thank you. So this is a 2025, it's a brand new research paper. It's published in Scientific Reports, which is a derivative of the Nature journal. So it's a really high-end journal. And the title of the paper there, for those of you watching on YouTube, you'll see this, and I'll put the questions up on the screen. The title of the paper is Knowledge of Gym Goers on Myths and Truths in Resistance Training. And it's by some Austrian authors, and they included, I think it was, 721 participants. They sent out a survey to different fitness centers in Austria. 721 people responded, of which 63% were men and 37% women, which they commented was representative of the general gym membership of those fitness centers. And the mean age was 30 years with a standard deviation of plus or minus 14 years. So I found this a really fascinating paper. There were 14 statements that these authors kind of had in mind. And they went to the body of research and they looked at meta-analyses. And a meta-analysis really is kind of a culmination of all of the research that answers any given question. And then they kind of had, they chose questions where they could have a clear answer, or there was certainly a clear body of research to support an answer. And then they simply asked true or false with these questions. And that's exactly what we're going to do with the listeners today, right? So we'll give them a bit of a test. You can test yourself at home, and we'll make sure there's a time lag in between asking the question to give you a chance to think of it and then answer it. And then you can mark your own answers.
Yes. So grab a piece of paper, grab a pen, write numbers 1 through 14. 1 to 14. This is true or false. Okay. At the end, you're going to grade yourself and we'll see what your score was and see if you are smarter than the average person.
I should add that we'll get into a bit of discussion on some of these as well, because some of them might be a surprise for some people. So we'll maybe have a bit of dialogue around some of these answers to make this a little bit more interesting. But should we just jump into the quiz, Amy? Are we good to go?
Yep. So again, you can see the questions on our screen if you're watching on YouTube, but go ahead and listen to the statements. This is question number 1.
Okay. So question 1, protein supplementation augments hypertrophy. So true or false, does protein supplementation help improve or help increase hypertrophy?
Okay. So Dr. Fisher, if somebody's listening that doesn't know what hypertrophy means, can you tell them what that means?
Of course, yeah. Hypertrophy is simply an increase in muscle size. So it's not strength, it's not health benefits, it's simply an increase in muscle size.
So does protein supplementation help you add muscle size? True or false?
Okay, so here we go. So the answer was true. And 86% of people who completed the survey got that one correct. So hopefully you got that one correct at home as well. And if you didn't, then we'll talk a little bit about it as well. We plan in the future to do a podcast on protein intake and the importance of protein. But one of the things that I would say is actually protein within our diet has been really undervalued. I think that most people who go to the gym are now becoming more aware of the importance of protein in their diet. Now, it doesn't have to be protein supplementation in the form of protein powder or a protein bar or a protein shake or anything like that. It's simply if we're meeting a certain dosage. And in fact, the typical dosages by government recommendations are about 0.6 of a gram per kilogram of body weight in the UK. But actually, that should be closer to 2 grams per kilogram, according to the scientific research for adding muscle strength and muscle size, certainly. So interesting one there.
Yes, and for the US listeners, what we have heard recently here, and tell me if I'm correct, Dr. Fisher, is 1 gram of protein per pound of ideal body weight. So if I am a 5'6" woman and my ideal body weight is 135, then I wanna eat 135 grams of protein per day, and most people are way under that in their daily intake of protein.
Absolutely. Most people are way under that. And certainly, as we get older, it's worth recognizing that our ability to absorb protein does decrease. So we can even start to increase that dosage slightly. So somebody in their 60s or their 70s whose ideal body weight is 135 might be needing to take in somewhere closer to 150 or even 160. A really good rule of thumb is about 40 grams of protein per meal. And then a snack should also contain a good amount of protein as well between meals.
Okay, perfect. Question 2.
Okay, so question 2, sticking with the theme of protein, timing of protein intake influences hypertrophy, true or false? So we've just talked about hypertrophy. We've said that that's purely muscle size. So does timing of protein intake influence hypertrophy?
Now, on this one, I think about like before or after a workout, right? Like if I time it exactly when I'm eating my protein, is that going to affect my ability to gain muscle size?
Right. So a lot of people will think before and after workout, and some people will think immediately after workout. So I've done a workout. Oh my gosh, now I need to run and get my snack or my protein shake or have a meal as quickly as I can so that I can get that protein straight into my muscles. That's what some people might be thinking. So our grand unveil, I feel like we should have a clock ticking as a timer to give people a
5,
countdown
4,
to give.
3. Yeah.
Okay, so our answer is false. Timing of protein intake doesn't influence hypertrophy. It's more about the dosage during the day and the total volume during the day. Now, 64% of people got that incorrect. And if I talk briefly about some research by some great colleagues of mine, Stu Phillips, Brad Schoenfeld, and so forth, they've done some research that's looked at this idea of there being what's called an anabolic window soon after resistance training, the idea that we need to get protein into our body within sort of 30 minutes to an hour after our workout. And actually, they joked in one of the papers and said, it's not so much an anabolic window, it's more an anabolic barn door. And it's really just about getting the right amount of protein in through the day, not the timing of it around our workouts. So yeah, that one was false.
Okay, and anabolic, just for the listener who might not know that word, what does that mean?
So anabolic is building.
Mhm.
We typically say there's 2 phases. There's anabolic and there's catabolic. Catabolic is breaking down. Anabolic is building up. Our body likes a degree of homeostasis. So for everything that builds up, it likes to break something down. There's sort of new cell birth and old cell death. And there's bone building and bone breaking down. And anabolic is simply the building up of tissue or building up of muscle in this context.
Okay, so you're saying that we have a lot of opportunity to build that muscle up as long as we're getting adequate protein throughout the day and strength training.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is a really nice, a really important message because a lot of people finish a strength training workout and they they don't feel like going and eating a meal straight away, or they don't feel like consuming a protein shake or something immediately after their workout. And many people will feel like they want to do that or they can do that, and that's great. But other people will feel like they want to have a rest, or maybe they don't have the time immediately, or maybe they have planned a meal, a couple of hours later with some friends or colleagues, and they're thinking, oh, well, I need to eat now and then eat again in a couple of hours. You absolutely don't. It's more about the protein intake throughout the day than it is about protein intake timing around a workout.
Okay. Question 3.
Question 3, again, protein related. Animal protein affects hypertrophy more than plant protein. So this has become a very contentious issue, I think. Obviously, people are very outspoken now about their vegetarian or their vegan dietary habits. And here we're talking about, is animal protein more beneficial for hypertrophy than plant protein?
Okay, so listeners, do you have your answer, true or false? Write that down and let's see what it is.
Okay, so our answer is false. And again, 54% of people got that one incorrect. So this is a really interesting one. And I must admit, when I first read that question, I thought, oh, well, maybe animal protein is more important for hypertrophy than plant protein. But then the caveat to that would be, unless through that plant protein diet, the person is getting the essential amino acids. So we have a number of amino acids that our body can produce, and the number that it absolutely has to take in through dietary habits, dietary intake. And again, we will have a podcast in the future that's going to get into some detail around protein. But as long as we are taking in those essential amino acids, then it doesn't matter whether they come from plant sources or whether they come from animal sources. So if you're vegan or vegetarian, that's absolutely great. You're going to optimize hypertrophy in the same way that somebody is carnivore or meat eater. So
Yes, exactly. We just know that oftentimes in order to get the same amount of protein or get to that same grams count of protein, it is going to take more plant protein, a higher volume of it, to get to the same amount of grams you might be able to get from a chicken breast, from animal protein. And so those are the two caveats to keep in mind, is that does the plant protein have those essential amino acids, and how much of it do you have to get to in order to hit your protein goals? But what you're saying the answer here is that as long as you hit your goals with protein and you're getting those essential amino acids, both animal protein and plant protein get the job done.
100%. Okay, so our next question is, creatine augments strength. True or false? Creatine augments strength. Now, it's worth clarifying for some people who may not know. Creatine is a supplement often used by people who go to the gym. It's typically probably used by younger people, I guess. Creatine is a naturally occurring substance within many meats and typically in red meat, but it's not absorbed in very high doses from food. So it's been a long time supplement that's been studied for decades now, partly to look at the health implications, but also to check that it's safe over prolonged periods. It's like a small white powder that many people will add to a drink. So the question, does creatine augment strength? Does creatine increase strength from resistance training?
Okay, so what's the answer?
And our answer is true. And 74% of people got that correct. Now, whenever we talk about supplements, it's interesting because a lot of people who first begin strength training will say, well, should I take creatine, and should I do this, and should I have a protein shake or a protein bar, and so forth. And I always sort of try to say, it's really important to create good nutritional habits, to have good whole foods in your diet rather than processed foods first. The fact that somebody is engaging in strength training is wonderful. And we, of course, would really encourage and promote that. And then we would encourage people to really take a look at their dietary habits. And if they've then got their dietary habits kind of up to a good standard, if they're whole foods, if there's a good protein intake, then they might start to look at supplements like creatine or protein shakes or protein bars or things like that to help them meet that protein dosage. But certainly, if you're not strength training, or if your strength training is not very good, or if your diet is not very good, then just adding in a supplement like creatine will not do the job for you. You've got to get your other things right first. And then this might add that extra 1 or 2%. But you've got to get the other things right first. I think that's really important to clarify.
All right. I hope you're feeling good so far and that you're getting 100% straight A's. Let's go on to question number 5.
Okay, so question 5 of 14. Carbohydrates increase performance in resistance training. True or false? Okay, what are your thoughts, Amy? Do carbohydrates increase performance in resistance training?
So I can see how somebody might think like, okay, I don't feel super energized right now and I want to go in for a resistance training session. Let me just go ahead and get some carbohydrates so I can have the quick energy I want in my body to work harder during my session. So in that case, I could see somebody saying true.
Okay, let's see. So the answer was false, and 75% of people got that incorrect. So 75% of people agreed with you, Amy, that there could be a reason why carbohydrates do increase performance in resistance training. And I find this a really interesting question. I personally don't like to train fasted. So I personally like to have had some food into my body before I do a workout, which basically means I can't get up in the morning and do a workout as the first thing I do. I really need to have had some kind of meal or some kind of food in before I work out. I just need to feel like I've got that energy. Without that, I often feel maybe a little bit lightheaded partway through the workout. Um, but the scientific evidence actually says that carbohydrate supplementation or carbohydrates don't increase acute performance in a resistance training workout. So an interesting one there, and certainly it means that if you feel like you can train before a meal or without a meal in the day, then that's absolutely great. Some people will be fasting for Ramadan or for further religious reasons, or maybe they just choose to go through periods of fasting, and that's absolutely fine. Carbohydrates, or the lack of carbohydrates in the diet won't negatively impact resistance training.
So Dr. Fisher, here's a follow-up question to that. Is there a possible difference between perceived performance and actual performance? So for example, some days I might feel like I didn't work that hard or didn't achieve as intense of a workout as I hoped because I feel tired. I feel like I'm not at my best that day, but yet my muscles may have performed just the same as usual, right? Is that a thing? Is that a possibility?
It's interesting because ultimately there is always going to be some variation day to day, and the way I always phrase this is in any strength training workout, the best you can give is all that you've got. And some days that will be more, and some days that will be less, and some days that might be more because you feel energized, maybe because of caffeine, or maybe because of carbohydrates, or maybe because of the placebo effect of those things. And other days you'll feel like you don't have the same energy. You might feel mentally and physically drained or emotionally drained and not feel like you've given the same. But ultimately, in every workout, a workout itself is a stimulus. Strength training and resistance training is not about what you achieve in the gym on that day. It's about what you give to the gym in that day. We had Matt Brisky on the podcast a few episodes back, and he said about this being an investment. So it's an investment of energy on any given day, not about the numbers that day produces. So maybe on that day you didn't reach the same number of repetitions, or you didn't lift as heavy a weight. And we shouldn't stress about that. We should just think, hey, I went in there and I gave it the best I could give on that given day. And that's really important that we still did it.
Every day is different. Your body's different every day. So it's not about comparison to yourself from last week. It's what did I do today?
Okay, so question 6. Magnesium prevents cramps. Now, I have to clarify. I went through these 14 questions and I looked at this as knowledge of gym goers on myths and truths in resistance training. And I thought, oh, I'm going to get, these are going to be easy ones. And I got to this question and I went, hey, This is a 50-50 for me. I want to ask the audience or phone a friend or something like that. This has not been my area of research to look at magnesium supplementation to prevent muscle cramps. Certainly not with the field of resistance training. So I looked at this question. I went, man, the best I can give myself is 13 out of 14 with a maybe yes or no for this question. So I'm going to do a big reveal now. Does magnesium prevent cramps? The answer is false. And again, 83% of people got that incorrect. So clearly the supplement industry is doing something wonderful to convince people that you should take a magnesium supplementation to prevent muscle cramps. Now, magnesium supplementation might be beneficial for other things. Again, this is absolutely not my area, and I can't comment on magnesium supplementation, but certainly it does not. The evidence shows that it does not prevent cramps.
Yes, I think it might help with post-workout soreness, but there's a difference between helping with that after a workout and preventing it.
Okay, so question 7, resistance training reduces flexibility. Now, when I read this question, I thought about some of the things that I was told when I was a kid doing gymnastics and playing basketball and swimming, that if I went in the gym, then that wouldn't be good for kind of athletic performance. And of course, we've had Wayne Westcott on the podcast, and he was told that when he was an endurance athlete in college. So I'm going to give everybody a few more seconds. Does resistance training reduce flexibility? True or false? Okay, so our answer is false, and 78% of people got that correct. That resistance training doesn't reduce flexibility. And in actual fact, there are multiple studies now that show that resistance training improves flexibility, our ability to allow a muscle to lengthen under load, so the eccentric muscle action where it lengthens under load, and our ability to contract a muscle forcefully actually help to improve the flexibility of a muscle. So that was a really nice one to see. That's kind of, in my mind, that's one of the older myths. And I'm glad to see that's certainly dispelled in the population that this survey was done with. But hopefully when you're listening at home, you got that correct as well.
Absolutely.
So question 8, low load resistance training is as effective as high load resistance training with regard to hypertrophy. So low load resistance training is as effective as high load resistance training for muscle growth, for muscle size increases.
You would think that there would be a difference, right?
Well, I'm going to jump ahead. Hopefully everybody's given an answer to this. The answer is true. Low load resistance training is as effective as high load resistance training with regard to hypertrophy. And actually, Amy, I wouldn't think that there would be a difference, because that's been a key area of my research, to look at something called the strength endurance continuum, to look at whether there is a difference between heavy and light loads, and whether they can augment or produce different adaptations with regards to strength, muscle hypertrophy, and muscular endurance. So actually, there is low load resistance training is as effective as high load resistance training for muscle growth. Now, interestingly, 51% of people got that one incorrect. So it's pretty 50-50 on the line there. But yeah, the answer is that it is true. Low loads are just as good as high loads for muscle growth.
Now, with those lower loads, do you simply just have to do more reps then?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the key, and without getting too far into this, because I'm sure the question is going to come up, but the key really is probably the effort level that we train to. So if you can only do 6 reps with a load, then that's not going to produce any difference in muscle growth than if you do a load that you can do 20 reps with, and you do all 20 reps. The idea is the 20th rep is as hard as the 6th rep. It's the same effort level, and therefore it produces very, very similar hypertrophy, or certainly no difference in hypertrophy. So question 9, sticking with the same comparison, is low load resistance training is as effective as high load resistance training with regard to maximal strength. So the previous question are asked about hypertrophy, asked about muscle size increases. And this question is asking about maximal strength increases. So is low load resistance training as effective as high load resistance training for maximal strength? Hopefully you've got an answer by now, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening to the podcast. The answer is false. And 68% of people got that correct. So low load resistance training is not as effective as high load resistance training for maximal strength. But I think that there are a couple of things that we should clarify around that. So I just mentioned that this was a key area of my own research, and I've published a number of papers on this area. We actually found very, very similar strength increases, or not discernibly different strength increases between low load and high load resistance training, although we phrase them as lower load and higher load, because I don't know where high begins and ends, and I don't know where low begins and ends. So we, for example, had one group training at around 50% and one group training at around 80% of their maximal force. And we found no difference in strength increases. So it might be that if you're within a certain margin, then you produce pretty similar strength increases. But if you move up to, say, 95% of your maximal force and drop down to, say, 40% of your maximal force or less, then there would now be a discernible difference between the strength adaptations for a low load at 40% and a high load at 90 or 95%. And it's worth kind of explaining why that might be. So a lot of it is thought to be or certainly my own hypothesis have been that there is something called asynchronous muscle fiber recruitment. Synchronous muscle fiber recruitment is simply our ability for our brain to recruit all of the relevant muscle fibers in one go, e.g. in one muscle action. Now, if we practice with a high load, then we practice the exact skill of that maximal recruitment, of that synchronous recruitment. It's called a motor schema, the skill element to it. And if we only practice with a light load, we're effectively practicing a different motor schema. So we're only practicing what's called sequential recruitment, that for each contraction, we recruit maybe a different number of muscle fibers or a slow increase in the number of muscle fibers, but not all of them in one go. So that's why there might be a difference between heavy and light loads for maximal strength adaptations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense.
Question 10, multiple set resistance training is more effective than single set resistance training. Multiple set resistance training is more effective than single set resistance training. True or false? Now, for clarity, multiple set resistance training is typically proposed in the form of you do a set of an exercise. So perhaps you do a set of bench press or chest press, and then you rest for a given time period, and then you repeat the exercise for a second set, and then repeat the rest, and then repeat the set for a third set, and so on and so forth for as many sets as you choose. A single set training program is often proposed as doing a single set normally to failure or to a very high degree of effort, and then perhaps having some degree of rest before moving on to the next exercise. Another way that multiple set training has been proposed, but not how this question is asking it, is doing more exercises per body part. So instead of just doing chest press, it might be chest press and incline chest press and pec flies and dips and incline dumbbell press and so on and so forth. This question is more asking multiple sets of the same exercise is more effective than single sets of the same exercise. Okay, so true or false? And our answer is false. And 90% of people got that incorrect. So yes, this is really interesting. And again, this has been a big part of my own research to show that resistance training doesn't need to be as time-consuming or as complicated as a lot of people have proposed. That actually a single set of an exercise, if it's taken to a high enough degree of effort, can produce very, very similar adaptations, or certainly not discernibly different adaptations to performing multiple sets of an exercise.
I think I have a theory as to why 90% of the people that took this survey got that incorrect. And I think it's because, if you're an exercise coach client, if you go to a strength type uh, personal training environment or atmosphere, and you exercise at a high level of effort like we have at our studios for one set per muscle group, and it's just very challenging, but meant to fatigue you. That is a unique approach that a lot of people don't do that at the big gym. So a lot of the people you might see go into a big gym I think that they are doing many sets because they don't have that mindset. Maybe they haven't realized that one high level or high effort set is as effective as many, many sets per muscle group, because they haven't experienced the approach in the past. What do you think?
Yeah, I think there's almost certainly some truth to that. I think that many people think about, if I do more work, then that's better than if I
Mhm.
do hard work.
Yeah.
Hard work is obviously hard. More work is generally easier. It's more of a time investment than an effort investment.
Mm.
And perhaps the people, in this survey were more willing to give time than they were to give effort. Um, I think that most of those people will probably realize that after a while it becomes easier to give effort than time. Um, but yeah, certainly the research shows that single sets are as effective as multiple sets.
Oh, so true. Good stuff.
Okay, so question 11. Resistance training to muscle failure is necessary for hypertrophy. So true or false? Resistance training to muscle failure is necessary for hypertrophy. Now, this is a really interesting phrase. And again, a lot of my research has been around effort and intensity of effort. And one of the phrases used is muscle failure. So muscle failure is technically the point where you cannot complete another repetition without change to your posture or pace or so on and so forth. So you've got a load and you've maybe performed 8 repetitions and you begin the 9th repetition, but you simply can't complete it. That would be muscle failure. Now, a very, very similar term, and probably a bit nicer term, is what's called volitional fatigue. And that's the point where I want to stop now. Okay,
Mhm.
I've done 10 reps and it hurts and it feels hard and I feel like my veins are bulging and my sweat is pouring and I just want to stop. That would be called volitional fatigue. And in some people, there's not much of a difference, but in other people, there's quite a big difference. Some people, as soon as it gets hard, they want to stop. And some people will really train to the point where they simply can't do anymore. And of course, with the exobotics devices, then it's not about stopping because the weight gets too heavy. It's simply about pushing as hard as you can in that 6th, 7th, 8th rep, or however many reps it might be in that program, and just giving what you've got to give. So, yeah. Okay, so our answer here was false. Resistance training to muscle failure is not necessary for hypertrophy. So I find this quite interesting. I'm not going to labor the point here, but I definitely think that effort is a driver for muscle size increases. So, and I think most people listening would hopefully hear this and think, well, yeah, of course, how hard I work is going to dictate the adaptations that I get. And certainly if you're trained, so if you've been doing strength training for a while, for 6 months or 12 months or many years, then how hard you train is probably going to be the biggest driver for how big your muscles can get. But there's also kind of a diminishing returns to this. And if you get to within 1 or 2 reps of failure, then you may have got all of the stimulus that you're going to get without necessarily reaching that point of you simply can't move the weight anymore. And in some cases, this is nice because in some cases, reaching true muscle failure when you can't lift a weight, well, you may need somebody there to take the weight from you if you're in a commercial gym with a barbell or something like that. But I definitely think it's important to caveat this by saying higher effort is important. You can't just go in the gym and go through 10 reps at a really light weight and say, hey, I didn't train to failure, but my legs are definitely going to get bigger, or biceps, or whatever it might be. So, but interestingly, 52% of people got that incorrect. So again, anything around that 50% mark is a pretty good split. But most people tended to think that actually training to failure was necessary for hypertrophy.
I think people think that is synonymous with their effort. You said, it's about your effort. And so how do you measure effort?
Okay, yeah. So this is exactly the point. And one of the questions that we have used over time, I mean, there are scales to measure people's effort, and people are not very good at gauging their physical effort level. There are two markers that we know that are quantifiable for gauging effort: when there is zero effort and when there is maximal effort. But if I say to somebody, okay, give 50% effort, they could be anywhere between 20% and 80% effort, and even in the most trained people. So, and they get better at gauging their effort the closer they get to failure, but they're still far from perfect. One of the methods that's used is to ask people how many repetitions in reserve. So, for example, Amy, if you're there on the cable machine and you're doing a pec fly, and you start doing a couple reps, and while you're doing the reps, I say to you, Amy, how many repetitions do you think you can do now? Or how many repetitions do you think you've got left? And you say, James, I think I can do 6 more repetitions. Well, I'm afraid you're not very good at guessing that. And that's not because it's you. That's because most people are pretty bad at guessing that. They are at best within 2 or 3 repetitions. So you may have said 6, but you may only get 3, or you may have said 6, but you may actually be able to get 9 or 10 reps. And of course, if you think you can only get 6, so you stop at 6, then you're leaving quite a few reps in the tank. You're leaving quite a lot of stimulus and adaptation on the table. Now, interestingly, if I give you a really heavy weight that you can probably only lift for 2 or 3 reps, and now I say, how many reps do you think you can do? You're probably going to be a lot closer, but that's only because your margin for error has come down quite a lot. If you're only, if it's already a very heavy weight, you can only be 1 or 2 reps away at the most.
Right. I can conceptualize 1 rep's worth of effort easier than 6 reps worth of effort.
Yeah. Okay, so question 12. Resistance training over full range of motion is superior to resistance training in partial range of motion for hypertrophy. So true or false? Is resistance training through a full range of motion superior to resistance training in a partial range of motion for muscle size increases? Now, again, we might clarify here, full range of motion is simply the range of motion possible at a joint based on muscular contraction. So I know Brian has some comments around what is full range of motion. We don't move through full range of motion because our tendons and ligaments and muscles prevent, over moving outside of a normal range. So let's consider it kind of a normal full range for a muscle. So is that superior to partial range of motion for hypertrophy? And our answer is true. It's true. So, and 70% of people got that correct. Now, if you listen to the podcast regularly, you would have heard a couple of episodes back. We actually did a talk about this, a podcast where we deliberately discussed range of motion within strength training, and we called it safe range of motion training. And I think that there is a big difference between full range of motion and extremes in range of motion. And one of the examples that we gave was if I do a leg press. So if I do a leg press, if I get on a leg press machine and I let my knees come back to probably about a 90-degree bend, maybe just over a 90-degree bend in my knees, that is a full range of motion for my quadriceps, my hamstrings, and my glutes. If I let my knees come any further back, what actually happens is my pelvis will rotate under. So the extra range of motion doesn't come from the muscles I'm trying to train. The extra range of motion comes from my low back, which now will lose all of its lumbar curve and my hips will rotate. So that extra range of motion doesn't come from the muscles that I'm trying to stimulate, I'm trying to exercise. When we talk about partial range of motion, what we're saying is, okay, what if I only train the last 10 degrees? What if I only train the first 10 degrees or 10 or 20 degrees? And I think that there is a lot of evidence that supports that partial range of motion strength training can produce adaptations beyond the range of motion that you've trained. So if somebody is injured and can only train within a small range of motion, that's definitely a good idea. But of course, what we really want to do is train a muscle through its full and safe range of motion.
2 more.
Okay, so question 13. And I when I read this question, I was amused and appalled all in one. So the question, true or false, men benefit more from resistance training than women. Now, I'm going to hope that most people who are listening to this podcast have listened to other podcasts where there's been some guidance around this, whether it's from us in the past or whether it's from other similar podcasts where they've talked about adaptations from resistance training for males and females.
Yeah, we're going to give you a hint. Think of the name of this podcast. You got your answer? Okay.
Our answer is false. So men do not benefit more from resistance training than women. And again, amused, appalled, whatever it might be, 65% of people got that incorrect. Now, when I looked at that and I saw 65% of people got it incorrect, I did think, what are these people thinking? And then I reread the question and I saw men benefit from resistance training more than women. And I just started to think maybe that's about how the question was written. Maybe the participant in the questionnaire might think, oh, well, the benefit I'm interested in is strength, or, oh, the benefit I'm interested in is hypertrophy. And in that sense, if you are a 20-year-old male or female, then you might think that men benefit more from resistance training than women when it comes to muscle size. In fact, you would still be incorrect because it's not the resistance training. It's actually just the anabolic status of your body based on hormones and so forth that means that you are predisposed to building muscle and adding muscle. But when I think of the term benefit, I don't think of strength or muscle size. I think of the health benefits of strength training. And there is absolutely no difference for men and women. They both benefit hugely by engaging in resistance training. And of course, as Amy said, strength changes everything is the title of this podcast. And we have talked about the brain and cognitive benefits. We've talked about bone health. We've talked about body composition. We've talked about numerous health benefits from resistance training.
Hopefully, if you've listened to this podcast for a while, you got this one correct.
Okay, final question. Question 14. Free weight resistance training is more effective than machine-based resistance training. So free weight resistance training is more effective than machine-based resistance training. True or false? And of course, if you're an exercise coach client, you almost certainly already know the answer because you're familiar with the equipment that's within the exercise coach location where you train. But if you're not an exercise coach client, then let's put you out of your misery. And the answer is false. And 55% of people got that correct. So shockingly, only 55% of people got that correct. But let me clarify once and for all for you. Your muscles do not know what they're contracting against. They either contract or they relax based on a neural impulse from your brain. It doesn't matter whether it's a dumbbell, a kettlebell, or a resistance machine. It doesn't matter whether it's a gallon of water, or whether you're pushing a car or anything else. Your muscles contract or relax. So free weights are no difference in how effective they are compared to resistance machines. They're both equally effective.
Okay. So that was the last question, right?
That was the last question. Yeah, there we go.
Okay, so now it's time to grade yourself. So let's do a quick recap. On the next screen here, if you're watching on YouTube, we have all the answers. We also have a quick explanation. So if you are looking at the screen and you wanted to get a refresher on why something was true or false, then you can hold this still and pause the presentation to see that. But so question 1, true. 2, false. 3, false. 4, true. 5, 6, and 7 were false. 8, true. 9, 10, 11 false, 12 true, 13, 14 false. Okay.
Absolutely. I think it's also worth clarifying, of the 700 something gym goers who completed this survey, the majority of people only got 6 answers correct, and the rest incorrect. So if you didn't get it correct, don't panic. You're no different from anybody else. And hopefully that's the purpose of this podcast, to kind of deliver that information to you and help guide you over your own strength training, or if you're a coach, your client's strength training.
Yes. So if you got over 6 correct, you are smarter than the average gym goer. And if not, you just need to study a little bit more.
And there's a couple of things I just really want to wrap up here, Amy. So there was a couple of statements at the end of the research paper, which I found really important to clarify. So I'm going to read these out. If you're watching on YouTube, then you can now see them on the screen. But obviously, if you're listening in the podcast, I will just read them to you. So the author said, it is estimated that only 14% of the leading scientific evidence for prevention and treatment in sports science and medicine becomes standard practice after an average of 17 years. Now, to me, that is just a horrendously shocking statistic, that of all the science that's being done in exercise science and sports medicine, only 14% of it actually trickles through to become standard practice after 17 years. And it speaks. In 2013, I gave a conference presentation where I talked about evidence-based medicine and strength training practice. And one of the things that I said was that the exercise community is going to struggle to be seen as part of the healthcare alliance. It's seen in the same esteem as doctors and nurses and medical practitioners, because they simply don't follow evidence-based practice. And my comments at the time were that the exercise and health and fitness industry are governed by what I phrased at the time, fads and fashions. So they might evolve based on what people are interested in any given day. And if you're a member of a typical fitness facility, then what you may have seen every 3 or 4 years or more frequently is that they just change all their equipment. And maybe they get rid of some equipment and they put in a punch bag. And then maybe they get rid of some equipment and they hang some functional trainers, some TRX or the brand functional trainers. And then maybe they get Olympic lifting platforms, or then maybe they change them all out for kettlebells. So, and there is this kind of fashion orientation through exercise. And I don't have a problem with any of those modalities of training. But if you're following fashion, then you're not following science. And I think that's worrying, that the science doesn't trickle through to the practice. Now, the authors went on and said, our results represent a call to action. They once again underscore that publication outcomes are subordinated to a poorly functioning system, resulting in a lack of ecological validity, a lack of translation into practice, and ultimately a gap between research and practice. Now, I read this statement, and one of the reasons I was in academia for nearly 20 years, published 130 something research papers within a niche area of strength training, and it's concerning that the idea is that research doesn't trickle into practice in a gym, or by coaches, or by personal trainers, or by trainees themselves. And of course, I now work for the exercise coach, and so it's part of my job to help transition that research into practice. The exercise coach obviously follow evidence-based practice. We engage in the research and we deliver what the research says to exercise coach clients. And then, of course, that's one of the purposes of this podcast as well. So even if you're not an exercise coach client, hopefully you're getting something from this podcast. And one of the things that I really hope that you're getting is this gap between what the research says and what you can be doing in the gym for your own strength training and resistance training, strength benefits, muscle hypertrophy benefits, and more importantly, your health benefits as well. So I definitely see this podcast as something that is there to bridge this gap between research and practice as well.
Yes. And thank you for your work there, because it is hugely important. I think about it and it's like, if what I'm choosing to do isn't backed up by research that or is proven to be effective, why am I doing that? How is that benefiting me? It's sort of like just sort of one way I could be using my time. I guess it's recreation, but is it really making the difference that I think it's making? If I don't know if the answer is yes, why am I choosing to invest my time or money into that, right? And so that is the purpose of this podcast. So thank you for that and the work there. That was fun. Well, I hope you feel good about yourself after after taking this quiz. And if you feel bad about yourself, that is okay. We have a full 2 seasons of information for you to brush up on your knowledge. But no, I think it was a lot of fun. It was meant to be something fun and different. But thank you for finding this for us, Dr. Fisher.
My absolute pleasure. I really hope people have enjoyed that. And yeah, like I said, there was certainly one question where I didn't know at all. So so I don't think there's anything to worry about if you didn't know, and that's the purpose of the podcast to learn.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, we'll see you next week. Remember, strength changes everything.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it with a friend. You can submit a question or connect with the show at strengthchangeseverything.com. Join us next week for another episode, and be sure to follow the show on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts so that you never miss another episode. Here's to you and your best health.